Kempire is brought to you by
Washington, D.C., the Kempire After Dark, the Villain Era live tour is coming to your city on August 22nd. But before that, we're coming to Philly on July 10th at City Winery. Then we're going to Atlanta on August 5th. Then we're going to Washington, D.C., and this is going to be an all-new show, all new hot topics, all new reality TV conversation, and all kinds of amazing guests and surprises. Be sure to get your tickets today, and don't forget, we're coming back to New York City on September 12th. Go get your tickets. There's also a live stream option exclusively for the New York City show. More information will be available in the description.
You're listening to Kempire here on the Kempire Radio Network.
Podcast family, you have the exclusive to our interview with Kirsten Brown, who is a deputy district attorney in California. And I told you I wanted to bring on some attorneys during the Sean Diddy Combs trial. And I'm going to continue to bring on more experts. Just like the prosecution's bringing out their experts, so are we, because I wanted to understand what exactly we have been summarizing, as you know, here on the podcast and on YouTube. I wanted to have a better understanding legally. How is the prosecution doing? How's the defense doing? And how are the witnesses doing? And one of the things that I got from this conversation is just how a prosecutor will look at a DV situation, and also how a prosecutor is currently looking at, are the prosecution, are the Southern District of New York doing what they're supposed to do when it comes to proving sex trafficking and racketeering and all of the stipulations that fall under that. And you'll be surprised by some of the answers that I got from Kirsten Brown, our special guest this week in our coverage of the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Guys, welcome back to the Kempire channel. I told you during this Sean Diddy Combs trial, there's no way that we could cover this trial without getting some experts in here, the same way the prosecution is currently doing. We're in week 3, and I'm so excited to welcome an attorney to the platform for the very first time. Kirsten Brown is here. Hey, Kirsten.
Hi, Kemp. How you doing?
First of all, I want to say thank you, because I appreciate when people reach out, because a lot of times I'm looking, but I just don't have the time to be reaching out and trying to find. So when you reach out talking about this case, and thank you so much for your compliments on how we're covering it, because you just never know when covering such a very serious case, if you're being sensitive enough, if you're not being ignorant to how and the things that are being talked about in this particular case. We're in week 3 of the Sean Diddy Combs trial. So there's a lot of questions that our community has, a lot of questions that I have. I'm sure there are questions that you even have in regards to this case. But before we get into any of that, let people know a little bit about your background.
Of course, Kemp. First, thank you so much for having me on. I have really, really appreciated your coverage. It has been incredibly accurate, incredibly sensitive to the nature of the subject, extremely informative and entertaining all at the same time. And when I say I felt called to reach out to you, I truly did, because your coverage has been really good. There's no shortage of internet attorneys right now. And you're not trying to play one. You're just giving the people the information that they want, but with a really spot on perspective. And that's why I wanted to have this dialogue with you. As you mentioned, I'm an attorney. Specifically, I am a prosecutor in Los Angeles County, and I am assigned to our sex crime divisions. So I do cases very similar to what Diddy is being tried for: adult and child sexual assault, human trafficking, and domestic violence cases. And of course, the Diddy case is rolled up sort of in all of those things. Yes. I've been doing this work for over 12 years, specifically doing sex crimes for over 7 years. So this is quite literally my wheelhouse and an area of the law that I feel incredibly passionate about. And while the idea behind this trial actually really is sad to know what happened to the victims of Diddy, it's sad to see Diddy where he is now, where he was a cultural icon, but it is a really good opportunity to talk to the public about these very serious yet pervasive issues in our society that aren't often at the forefront of pop culture.
Yeah, it's crazy to me. And there's so much of it recently with the R. Kelly of it all, the Bill Cosby of it all. And you're right, it is really sad, especially within the Black community, that people that we once looked up to or appreciated and they had such iconic legacies have been tarnished by their bad behavior.
Right. And that's the key. It's his own behavior, regardless of where anyone is netting out on the charges, a potential conviction or acquittal. the behavior has been established.
Yeah.
And putting all the legal stuff aside, it's incredibly problematic. And it's just really, really sad to see. And it feels like, I'm sure like this was our childhood. This is when we were in the club. This is what was playing. So it's just a really, really sad state that we are where we are.
Most definitely. And as you said, these are cases that you actually handle as a part of your job. And I know in our email exchange, you talked about the 2016 Intercontinental hotel video footage where we saw Sean Diddy Combs kicking and dragging Cassie Ventura in those hallways.
Right.
In 2016, you mentioned that this is something that probably would have come across your desk.
This would have been not me personally, but it would have been handled by my office.
Okay.
That if it was happening in state court at the time, and Cassie would have had to have been a cooperative witness, or someone would have had to have reported it in real time or within the statute of limitations. And that would have been a felony 273.5A in California specifically, but that's a felony domestic violence charge. And depending on her injuries, there might have been a great bodily injury allegation added onto it, which is a penalty enhancement.
And speaking of the actual charge there, first of all, what is the statute of limitations? Because that's been a question I've been asking myself, because what we've seen in this case is that he has broken the law, but it seems as if there are no criminal charges outside of these federal charges in regards to domestic violence. What are the statute of limitations in California for something like that?
For a misdemeanor charge, it's 1 year. For a felony charge, it's 5 years. With most felonies, except murder, there's no statute of limitations. And in a lot of sex crimes, the legislature, not only here in California, but also in New York, which is why you've seen the Weinstein cases, which is why you saw Bill Cosby, et cetera, those statute of limitations have been expanded much broader than what they were, which is allowing people to file new lawsuits, both civilly and criminally, over farther out from when the incidents occurred. In fact, that's what Cassie was able to do, and she was bumping up against that statute of limitations for her civil lawsuit back in, 2023?
Yeah. So why exactly didn't she file maybe a criminal charge?
First of all, it's not uncommon for victims of domestic violence to not be cooperative with the prosecution. If I had to put a number to it, I'd say 95 to 98% of the DV cases I've done, the victim has been uncooperative.
Wow.
Sometimes during the proceedings that could change, but more often than not, they're uncooperative, and oftentimes they're actually still in a relationship with their abuser. And let me give the caveat, I'm saying woman because we're talking about women in this case. This is not to suggest that men can't be victims of domestic violence as well, that there can't be same-sex domestic violence relationships, all of those things. So when I'm using these terms, it's related to this particular trial that we're talking about. So I just want to be clear about that.
Well, and I appreciate that, because I think people don't realize that either. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out. So with that particular case, if Diddy had been charged then, what would have happened in 2016?
Cassie would have needed to be cooperative, although because there's the video that would have been admissible evidence at the time, that's probably a case that we may have been able to pursue without her. If we were able to bring in the appropriate people to ID what happened, perhaps give a little bit of context, and then lay the proper foundation to authenticate that video, basically so that the jurors can trust what they're seeing. They know the parties involved. And then, of course, we're not required to provide the context, but you want to. But it would have been more challenging without Cassie's cooperation.
Just to take a quick sidebar, in regards to the Megan Thee Stallion case with Tory Lanez, because everyone thinks that she's the one who pressed charges, but it was actually Los Angeles that was pressing charges against her.
Correct.
Can you clarify the difference here in regards to that so people have an understanding? Because to me, it's all related.
And that's a great way to articulate the point of, even with Cassie, it's not the victim that the people are representing. I am representing the county of Los Angeles and the people of California. And just like the prosecutors in this case, you're not representing an individual victim criminally. You are representing the people of that particular jurisdiction, which is why we are often moving forward with cases, even when the named victim does not want to participate, because we're trying to protect the public and society society, generally speaking. The only time we will not pursue a case when a victim absolutely says they don't want to participate, as our office policy, is when it involves a sex crime. And domestic violence is traumatizing and brutal. Sex crimes are particularly traumatizing and brutal. And if a child or adult victim is saying, I don't want to participate in this process, we're not going to force them to do it. It doesn't mean we can't ever pursue the charges, but it will be when that person is ready. Versus if it's a robbery victim, if it's a domestic violence victim, if it's an assault victim, they can say, you can pound sand, I'll never come to court. And I'll say, guess what? I'm going to issue a subpoena. You're coming to court. You're going to testify, even if you're not cooperative, and we're going to pursue those charges because we're trying to protect the public.
Yeah. The hotel, because Cassie on the stand in the Sean Diddy Combs trial revealed that there's about to be a settlement between her and the now closed an Intercontinental hotel. What level of responsibility and possible legal trouble could the Intercontinental hotel be in for basically suppressing evidence? Am I using that correctly?
It is. And there need to be some evidence to show that there was an intentional destruction of that video. To be fair, a lot of public places that have video, it tapes over. So oftentimes, if you're not getting it immediately, it could be lost forever. And it doesn't mean we charge that establishment with destroying the evidence. Clearly somebody kept it. But here's what's interesting, Kemp. You, a hotel, me, your community, no one is required to affirmatively call the police and report a crime or step in to help somebody else. So the Intercontinental is not culpable from a criminal perspective for failing to protect Cassie. But if there was some type of evidence that they deliberately destroyed that evidence and we were pursuing a prosecution, then we could look at some type of obstruction charges, but it wouldn't be against the hotel. It would be against the individual who destroyed that evidence. Now, in terms of her civil settlement, it's going to be a different cause of action about what the hotel should have been doing to keep its guests safe. Because from a civil perspective, you do have a responsibility as a business to keep your guests safe. And in this place, when Cassie was reaching out for help and security comes up and is engaging in a conversation about covering it up, allegedly, that's when they can be creating some liability for the hotel.
Okay. Victims. Because one thing that I learned from watching Worst Ex Ever on Netflix, but what stood out to me in those episodes were the fact that our domestic violence laws around this country in every single state seem to fail a lot of those relationships in that documentary. What is your perspective on how that is handled across this country when it comes to domestic violence, and what can be done better?
We could do a whole episode about just this, because it is not lost on me. I'm coming in, I got a police report, I'm filing charges, and I'm seeing in Cassie's case something horrific that was done to someone and some other victim. This is their life. This is their relationship. And oftentimes, and I think we got a bit of this in Cassie's testimony, a victim and an ultimate survivor of domestic violence isn't always looking to get out of the relationship. They're looking for the abuse to stop, because they love that person, right? There might be kids involved. There might be some financial dependence or just a long-term relationship. And I'm coming in, dropping a bomb on someone's life, and their partner could potentially be in custody, or they have been prohibited by the court from continuing to see each other. And it's really blowing up someone's life. And meanwhile, I'm going home and getting back to what I have to do. So I really try to be cognizant of what this means to pursue criminal charges for someone who is a victim or a survivor of domestic violence. I think we need more meaningful classes. There's the classes offenders have to take when they are not sent to jail or to prison as part of their conviction that's meant to break the cycle. And I think we need to have realistic conversations about whether or not people are actually breaking up after allegations of abuse have come forward. And if you're continuing to stay together, and particularly if you have kids, how do we break that cycle of violence and help both parties be contributors to a healthy relationship? So criminalization isn't always the answer, but domestic violence is not a one-off crime in most cases. It's persistent and it often elevates. And I don't want to say in every case it ends in murder, but there are plenty that end in murders and attempted murders, and I handle those cases often as well.
Wow. Wow. Okay, let's get into more of this trial because we are week 3. I could have had you on week 1 because there's just so much, but I'm going to try and remember all the things. And if there are things that I don't address, please feel free to chime in and bring up. But the focal point is Cassie Ventura and her testimony. She is a star witness. It feels as if the Southern District of New York was alerted based off of her 2023 lawsuit against her civil lawsuit against Sean Diddy Combs, which he settled in less than 24 hours. We found out during the trial that he paid her $20 million to settle that. She, apparently, allegedly, I don't know if I say allegedly, but I'll say it, that she wanted $30 million, but they settled for $20 million.
Right.
Based off of the first week, let's take it week by week. Let's take it week by week because we're in the 3rd week now. How did you feel after the first week in regards to how the prosecution was presenting their case?
Hot take. I have had the opinion from the get-go that Cassie is a salacious and important witness, but she's not the star witness.
Ooh.
She is not who ultimately is going to bring this case home and tie it up. It is, as we're starting to see this week, the Capricorn Clark, the Christina Coram when she testifies. If you look at the indictment...
Okay, hold on. You know something? Wait, do you expect that KK, a.k.a. the Chief of Staff, Christina Coram, will testify?
They're not releasing their witness list, although it is established and the defense knows exactly who everybody is. You have to turn that over as a prosecution, but they got permission from the judge to not have to share that information with the media immediately. And they might only be giving the defense a couple of days notice about who they're putting up next.
Oh.
I don't know for certain, but I'm speculating that there's going to be additional people that were a part of the Combs enterprise, as well as security guards, because they mentioned security personnel specifically in the indictment that we should expect to see testifying. And I thought Capricorn Clark closed a lot of loops with her testimony in terms of the criminal enterprise of it all and the additional employees of the corporation or the entity being participants in the racketeering.
Yeah, wow. So how are you feeling about how the prosecution handled week 1? We'll start with week 1.
And here's the other caveat that I have to give, and you've mentioned this a lot too, we're not getting transcripts or direct readouts. We have to pull sources from multiple media outlets. You've had fantastic coverage of what's happening. There's Inner City Press that's giving real-time information about what's being said. So it's hard to have a fully formed opinion, not having been in the courtroom, not hearing everything that Cassie had to say, and not seeing how it landed with the jury. Although based by all reporting, it was powerful testimony. It was emotional testimony. It left a lot of questions, maybe more questions than answers, but it was definitely bombshell testimony that set already high interest off in this trial. She was up there probably a little bit longer than she needed to be. And personally, I might have tightened up her testimony, but I liken it to this. Domestic violence is a state crime. I do those cases all the time. I can get in and out with a DV case. SDNY, federal prosecutors aren't doing domestic violence cases standalone. If I had to do a white collar case, I might be a little bit all over the place too, without understanding how to have an established timeline and go off of that timeline to really paint the picture for the jury. So again, without knowing all of the information, that's just my opinion. Yeah. What it felt like was lacking was a very clear timeline, which is important. This was a 10+ year relationship that started loving with consensual participation in the freak-offs. And at some point it turned abusive. But I think it's hard for us as the public to understand the trajectory of how things happened and when they started to escalate. Now, maybe that testimony came out and we're just not getting the readback of that. But that's the one thing I would have done differently if I was prosecuting this case. But that's based on my experience in state court. But I do think she was a very powerful first witness. And in a 6 to 8 week trial, I had no expectation that this case was going to be proven by the end of week 1. Because if it was, then we don't need another 5 weeks. Everybody would have been like, well, what are we doing now? So you have to methodically build a case step by step, brick by brick, witness by witness. And you're not allowed to call irrelevant witnesses. So each person that you see testify is going to hit some element that the prosecution ultimately has to prove when they argue this case in front of the jury at the end of the trial.
Okay. In regards to, because your hot take was that you don't believe that Cassie was the star witness. And a lot of people were speculating the reason why the prosecution had her go up first was logistical, because she's 8 weeks pregnant. At this particular point, she's given birth. Congratulations to Cassie. So if she's not necessarily the star witness, why have her come out first?
I definitely think the logistics mattered. Obviously, baby was coming any day now. Could have came that week. At that point in her pregnancy, we were literally talking about any day. So it very well could have been logistically, or it could have been to come out with a bang and a strong show of force with really compelling, and if you're being more cynical, salacious testimony that's going to hook everybody from the beginning and leave them wondering, like, how are they going to bring this home? What does this have to do with racketeering? What does this have to do with sex trafficking? And then these questions are starting to get answered with subsequent witnesses as we carry on. So without knowing their full witness list, I can't necessarily say that it was a good or a bad idea because we don't have all the information, but it grabbed all of our attention and has the country, if not the world, in a chokehold. So for that reason alone, it was a smart strategic move.
In regards to week one, the defense and their cross-examination of Cassie Ventura, how do you think that the defense handled week one?
I think that the defense attorney that they used to cross her in terms of matching her energy and not coming across as attacking her, I think seemed like it came across well. So there was a good match of the energy. I think, and this is what I think is interesting about how they handled Cassie. On the one hand, they wanted to throw out instances of her being violent, right? Of her being jealous, of her kind of being out of control, of her liking the freak offs and wanting to participate, and using that to attack her credibility. Yet you're normalizing all this behavior with Diddy. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy from this man. Don't judge him for it. Yes, it's weird. Yes, it's freaky. Yes, maybe they have a kinky, if not violent relationship. It is what it is, and it doesn't belong in court. But when it comes to Cassie, all of these things are reasons for her to not be a credible witness. That's my biased prosecution hat coming out. But I will say, I think they handled her the best they could. And really all you can do is start to poke little holes. You're not going to discredit her completely. You can't get up there and say you're just a liar, but you have to knock down her credibility as much as possible and poke little holes that will further diminish her credibility when they're arguing at the end.
Which is what we're seeing in week 3. I mean, we've seen it in week 1, 2, and 3, but I saw that with Capricorn Clark's cross-examination when they were talking about, well, Cassie did receive a lot of the lion's share of Bad Boy's access and helping create her career, because one of the things that Cassie has said was that she had a 10-album deal. She was obligated to Diddy basically for the rest of her life. So we're seeing multiple things where they're trying to poke at Cassie and her credibility and some of the things that she said in her testimony in week 1. One of the things, and I cannot forget to ask, okay, before we get to the mistrial of it all, so that's coming.
Okay.
I want to talk about the jury, though. The jury includes 8 men and 4 women. In your perspective, how does that look for Diddy? Based off, I don't know if you've seen any of the profiles in regards to the jury. What's your perspective on the jury makeup and how that might benefit the prosecution versus the defense? Again,
another hot take.
I love hot takes.
I'm less concerned about the gender or the sex makeup of the jury and more concerned in seeing what some of these people do for a living because of how that particular personality type receives information. For example, there, I believe, is a financial analyst on there. There's some type of engineer. Engineers and analysts receive cases like this completely different, and they absolutely dissect jury instructions. So the prosecution will have to be so buttoned up in explaining the elements of each offense and defining the words because, and again, this is just based on my experience and sort of having to...
That's why you're here.
Right. To internalize how prospective jurors process information. But an engineer is not worried about somebody sitting on the stand, tears, drama, crying.
Pregnant?
okay.
Are they not going to care about her being pregnant?
Unbothered. But you get a very technical witness on the stand, like someone talking about fingerprints, DNA, more science type stuff. They're dialed in and they're clocking all of that testimony. And they are dissecting the actual language of what the prosecution has to choose. I don't like a financial analyst or an engineer on this type of case, but that's me personally.
Okay.
So I'm looking much more towards profession and some life experience than I am about the gender makeup, because it already happened. But more men than women does not bother me in a domestic violence or a sexual assault case.
Okay. If I was one of the people that were being considered for the jury, would you select me?
You know what? Based on what I've been hearing, I absolutely would. And not only would I select you, I would want you to be my foreperson, because you would be in the jury room bringing everybody back to the substance of what we're talking about.
Oh, you're right.
And talking about the cycle of abuse and the cycle of violence. And this is why this testimony mattered. And we know that this jury wasn't sequestered and they're being admonished to not talk to people about the case or consume any media about the case. And we hope that they're taking that seriously. I think jurors, by and large, take their jobs very seriously, particularly on a high-profile case. But when they go into the jury room, something I would say as a prosecution in closing, if you hear of any mess back there when you're deliberating, if it appears that somebody else was Googling terms, was on YouTube, was watching Kempire Daily, send a note out to the judge. We need to know about it, because that's juror misconduct. And I think you'd be that juror that was in there keeping everybody else in line and on task, because who your foreperson is really important. They can drive how the jury is working. They can help keep things organized. If fights break out, they can help gather those kind of people and just really keep, from a prosecution perspective, I need you to stay on task and not have anyone going off the rails. So the right foreperson is going to do that for you.
How do they decide who's going to be the foreperson?
They get to pick. Well, I take that back. In state court, the panel decides. What I'm not sure about in federal court, it might be assigned. I'll research that and I'll hit you back and confirm that with you one way or the other.
Thank you. Okay, keeping this about me. Well, no, because I think it's important, because I've mentioned it multiple times. I think I would have been a good juror. I didn't want to be, though. I'll just say that. But because I've reported on this as a media personality, as a prosecutor, would that be something like, maybe not?
So when I'm trying to figure out whether or not someone is familiar with the case that I'm doing, it's not just, are you familiar, but what's your source of information? Because all information sources aren't created equal. So that's what I want to vet. Yeah. Not just what do you know, but where did you get your information from? If you are in the gutter of the internet, on conspiracytheory.com, then no, I can't have you poisoning the tank in my pool talking about some mess. Yeah. Are you an informed person who follows the news and is aware of what happened and you're getting your information from credible sources? Then it doesn't bother me so much. And more importantly, my biggest issue and what the judge is going to instruct you, can you set all of that aside and focus on what you hear in the courtroom and only what you hear from the witness's mouth, and make a decision based on that, not what your sister's cousin homeboy told you they heard about what happened with such and such, not your own personal experience, not your assumptions, right? You can make inferences from the evidence, but you can't create this whole scenario. The universe you're given is the witness testimony, and you need to be making decisions based on that, not, well, I think it went down like X, Y, and Z, because if it was me, I would have done this. And that type of thing is misconduct, and you want your foreperson or someone else to bring that to the party's attention.
Why were these jurors not sequestered? Because it's such a high-profile case.
I can't say I would have wanted them sequestered. It is a lot to ask people to be away from their lives, their families, for an extended period of time. And I think the most infamous case we can think about of a jury being sequestered is the OJ case. 9 months is a crazy long time. Those people deliberated for about 10 minutes. Bags packed at the courthouse, ready to go. And there's again, so much with that trial, but could it have been different if they didn't feel that pressure of being over it and wanting to get out? And we're in a completely different media space now where there's just so much more information available. It's a risk to not sequester them, but I wouldn't want an angry or a frustrated jury that maybe isn't already getting along with each other, because that's an issue, or that's feeling like they want to move through it really quickly to reach a decision so that they can go.
Once, because I know they're given instructions in regards to how to come to their decision, but once they're done with this case, can they talk about it? They can come on the channel and we can do interviews with the entire cast?
And it's their choice. Their information will never be given out from the courts. Okay. It remains confidential, but if they choose to come forward, they can.
And I probably wouldn't suggest that they come forward, because just because Diddy's behind bars doesn't mean he still doesn't have influence and power out here.
Right. Right. And when some people just, they want to get back to their life, and there's all the internet's like, oh, they can monetize it. People are going to come out writing books. I mean, like, that's work and effort that not everybody is necessarily into. And who knows what kind of vicarious trauma these jurors might have dealt with hearing the kind of testimony they're hearing. They might say, I'm done. I've done my service. Don't call me again. I'm not talking about this. You never really know.
Sidebar, to bring back it to me. No, the reason why I bring it up, because it's a perfect example of, well, I probably wouldn't be able to be a juror because I was like, this is my bread and butter. I got to work, judge. If I'm not here reporting on this case, and I'm first of all, people are going to know I'm one of the jurors. Where's Kempire? Why is he not talking about Diddy? I wouldn't be talking about Diddy either.
But that's not, in a long trial, that can be a factor in not having to serve, but it's true for most people. And you want people who have a job, a life, something going on. When there's people who come in and they're like, yeah, I don't work and I'm not trying to. Beige flag, some kind of flag, maybe not fully red, yellow flag pops up like, what's going on with you? But 6 to 8 weeks, there's an argument to be made that has a significant financial impact if you don't have employment, or you're self-employed, or you don't have an employer that's going to pay you to be on that panel. Yeah. But it's not going to automatically get you kicked off for cause.
Damn. Why I can't get on the Diddy trial? I'm going to have these conversations with you on the outside.
Right. But think about the content you could have had at the end of the 6 to 8 weeks.
That's what I'm thinking about. I'm like, I could have wrote a book. But
you sure could.
I could still write a book.
Turn that into a script, sell that story, honey. There's just all kind of options.
This is playing out like an episode, a season of Power. I'm like,
isn't it?
I'm like, what is going on?
Like literal pearl clutching. And just, I, again, haven't been a fan of Diddy. I remember back to watching Making with the Band and Lorianne being on Making with the Band, boom, cack, and she would always be like, what is Diddy gonna say? And I'm like clutching, like, what did Diddy do? I mean, just.
I wonder if Lorianne will end up testifying, because her name has been brought up.
I have wondered too. She had to have seen some stuff.
Yeah. And she also had, based on Making of the Band, we saw their very hot-blooded relationship. And at one particular point, she stopped working with him as well. And all of a sudden, she started working with him. And then we see what Capricorn Clark talked about this week in regards to being fired by him, threatening, saying that you'll never work again. You'll want to take your own life after this. I'm just like, I think that's why people need to understand and have some compassion for the people that worked under him, understanding power dynamics.
Yes.
Understanding the music entertainment industry. I'm not saying that it's right, but this is what the entertainment industry was and is in regards to people that are in it and people that really wanted to have a career in it. And people thought that this is what you needed to do in order to be a Sean Diddy Combs. Now we're seeing that the Sean Diddy Combs that you thought that you knew actually was a lot of smoke and mirrors.
Or actually, he showed us exactly who he was. We just thought it was for the cameras. There's plenty of footage of him acting like a tyrant, but at the time we thought it was cute and look, he's a boss, or it's played up for the cameras, Diddy being a tyrant. And come to find out, that's just how he ran his business, for better or worse.
I have a side question because I don't want to forget this question. If Diddy is convicted and he's still facing all of these civil lawsuits, how does that happen? He just has to have his lawyers handle it while he's convicted?
Correct. His lawyers will handle it, and you can be ordered out so that he can attend his proceedings and be present in the courtroom. But his lawyers would handle it. I'd be curious to see what, if anything, went to trial if he was convicted in this case. And now, mind you, I don't deal with forfeit asset forfeiture at a federal level, but in looking at the indictment, they threw in some language about forfeiting his assets should he be convicted. So like, that's a lot of property and whatnot that's going to be seized. So I'm like, how much is going to be left in the pot for the civil suits?
Oh, well, let me tell you something what I learned today. Diddy is making money right now off of that private jet.
Is he?
That private, look, I got some tea for you. that $60 million private jet, apparently he's been renting it out and it's been utilized multiple times. He's made nearly like $4 million in maybe like the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, he got a lot of lawyers to pay.
Well, yeah, and he has quite a few attorneys. That's a standout. Speaking of which, the first week, damn, we're still in the first week. We're gonna fast forward this. But in the first week, we saw his daughters and his son and his mother there. I know, just if I'm thinking basic layman, you're doing that strategically to show the jury,
correct,
I'm an upstanding guy. I have children. They need me. They need their father. But I also said, this is very traumatic. I don't know if this is going to land well with a jury when you have children listening to what you're admittedly saying you were abusive to this girlfriend and you like to get freaky with baby oil and applesauce. Right. How did you feel though, seeing the children, the mother there in court the first week? We haven't really seen them as much, definitely not the daughters, because proms and graduations and things.
Correct.
Like,
right.
What was your perspective on that?
I mean, I understand the why of it all. And from a defense perspective, strategically, why you want to humanize him, why you want to see that the courtroom was full of people who love him and think that he's a wonderful father and a wonderful person. If you're not going to have someone present the whole time and you're going to sort of bring them out strategically, I think it's important when you do it. Remember the A$AP Rocky trial? Rihanna popped up at the end.
Yes. Rather
than coming on day one or jury selection opening statements and then having people like, well, where's Rihanna? The rest of the trial, she didn't come and she came with the kids at the very end. Maximum impact. Riri knows how to make an entrance every time. Trial, Met Gala, con, all of it. She knows how to make an entrance.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting that they made such a show of having the entire family there only for that to dwindle and for them not to be present the remaining weeks. It created a lot of discussion points. I think we were all scratching our head about why you would have your daughters there who are not far off from the same age as Cassie when you guys got together, and to have them like standing up and leaving the courtroom. It's sad. And as a parent, even if I was on trial, I'm not putting my children in a situation to hear such inappropriate things. Yeah. His sons, I get it. They're adults.
Yeah.
Maybe they knew. I don't know. That's all speculation.
Christian Combs is being accused of similar things. I mean, at least in a recent civil lawsuit. So
right, they're grown. But your mother, your daughters, maybe you have them come up. I see why you want them to be there, but maybe have them appear at different points. Yeah. Cassie's testimony did not seem like the time to have your 18-year-old daughters there. And especially during like such an important time in their life between prom, high school graduation, I feel for the kids too. And how do you carry on like everything is all good and during what should be a really exciting time centered around them, and your dad's on trial and the whole world is watching.
I find it so interesting because in the comment section, I see so many, not our comment section, just social media. I see so many people say, oh, but he's such a great dad. And I was like, can you really?
And.
But for me, is he really a great dad? Based on what we've seen on social media, we don't know what he's been doing behind the scenes. If you could harm women the way that you've harmed women, the fact that you can harm people the way that you've done over your career, steal from people, I don't know what kind of dad you really are.
But I think you're right. And I think having them listening to what you're accused of is questionable judgment.
Yeah.
But I'll add it to a yes and, Kemp. Usually what you hear about people who are charged with DV type of crimes or even sexual abuse type of crimes, the people around them, usually you don't have a whole team of people helping you pull it off, but they're shocked. And it's not the person they knew because it's actually someone who's very charismatic, bit of a narcissist, but they understand how to work a room, play a room, keep people around them and sort of make people feel better. And these allegations come out and people are shocked, at least the ones that aren't closest to them, shocked about what's happening. And you can, in knowing this, a parent, you can be a whole person separate from the type of parent you are. When you could be doing your dirt outside of the door and come home and kiss your child with your filthy lips and want the best for your kids. And you know. So I often argue in front of jurors because there'll be character witnesses coming in on cases saying, but they're such a wonderful person and they were so great at work. And I'm like, yes, and. Because you didn't see it or because they never whooped your butt doesn't mean they weren't beating on their girlfriend. Yeah. It's two completely different things. And how you know this person and how they present to the world to you. We also know he put out hit music. We don't all think he's a bad producer now, but you can be a bad person and still have other aspects of your life of being productive or even being a pleasant and positive person to other people.
Yeah.
It's ironic, but it's possible.
It is ironic. I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see in the future when they talk about their father, but we shall see. Mistrial. That was talked about in the first week because, as you saw, the defense wanted to have Cassie on the stand. Based on the journalists and the people that were in the room, even the judge seemed a little annoyed with the defense when they were cross-examining Cassie. Like, are we going to get to the point here? It felt like they were dragging it out in order to trigger a mistrial. And according to prosecution, that's what they actually accused them of in court documents, accusing them of trying to trigger a mistrial by dragging this out, trying to have Cassie stay over the weekend and testify, even though the judge agreed. Like, we agreed on a schedule. This judge, I need to ask your thoughts on the judge.
He runs a tight ship.
Yes, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. What was your reaction, though, when you heard that the prosecution was accusing the defense of trying to trigger a mistrial? And what does that mean? Because a lot of people were confused by that. Like, what do they mean to trigger a mistrial? How does that trigger a mistrial?
Sure. So a mistrial would mean a stop to the proceedings and this jury being dismissed. It does not mean Diddy goes free or that Diddy it's not the same thing as being acquitted. It means this trial stops. Now, a mistrial can happen for a number of different reasons. It can be the jury is deadlocked, meaning they can't reach a unanimous verdict after sufficient deliberation. And so the judge would declare a mistrial, dismiss the jury. It can be based on a credible accusation and finding of prosecutorial misconduct. It could be based on juror misconduct. It could be based on an error in the proceedings. Like, all of these things could trigger a mistrial. And that means this trial stops. But in all likelihood, they would start this process all over again. They would look for a new jury. They would pick new jurors. They would start from the very beginning with Cassie and put on a brand new trial as if this one never happened.
Wow.
The only time a mistrial could potentially lead to a dismissal, I shouldn't say the only time, but the likely scenario would be if it went all the way to the jury deliberating and they came back hung, but it was like 11-1 or 10-2 not guilty with only one or two people voting guilty. Because when the jury hangs, you don't know who voted which way, but you get a number of what that hang is. With a verdict like that or a split verdict like that, the defense could make a credible argument that the case could be dismissed because no reasonable jury, my husband just walked in, sorry, no reasonable jury would find this defendant guilty even if we did the process all over again. Now, the judge would have to make that ruling. And the prosecution would get to argue that we want an opportunity to try the case again. Now, mind you, while the judge is not the trier of fact, that's what a jury does, and they're only supposed to interpret and make rulings on the law, the judge will have heard all of the evidence and can be considering in their mind a different set of 12 people. If they heard this evidence, very well could have convicted. I'm not dismissing this case. We're doing the trial again. Okay. Interestingly, with Cassie's testimony, and I'm sorry, I feel like I'm dragging on.
No, keep going. I love it. I'm learning a lot.
What happens is if you don't have a witness who testifies on direct that has a complete cross-examination, that is a Sixth Amendment constitutional violation. You are violating the Confrontation Clause. Every person has a right to confront and cross-examine their accuser. So if they didn't finish cross-examination, the court would have asked to strike all of Cassie's testimony, meaning it would be like we never heard from her. Cassie is the named victim in the racketeering, so the prosecution case could potentially fall apart, but it doesn't necessarily automatically mean a mistrial. but them not getting Cassie fully having completed her cross-examination could have triggered a series of events that could have led to a mistrial. Now, the other option could have been we pause Cassie's testimony because she's in labor. We take other witnesses out of order. And because this is such a long trial, now no woman wants to be back on a witness stand within days or a week of having a baby, but we could have paused her testimony. She goes and has her baby, has a week or two to recover. We bring her back at the end of the trial and she's able to finish her cross-examination. That could have been a possibility as well. Breaks up the flow, so it's not ideal, but it's probably something that prosecution would have raised before, kind of submitting on a mistrial.
Okay.
And then the last thing is, if you get a mistrial for prosecutorial misconduct, like the defense was alleging today,
yes,
that could lead to a motion to dismiss by the defense being granted. If I am intentionally doing something that I know I am ethically or legally not allowed to do in a trial, and that's misconduct, and the court agrees with the defense, and then they make a motion to dismiss the case, that might be the outcome because of my misconduct that I was in control over.
So I feel like it's been at least 3 times that the defense has tried to.
And I'm sorry to cut you off again, but I don't want to forget this point. The other thing is, and this is more often than not the case, the defense knows very well that a motion to dismiss, a motion for a mistrial is not going to be granted, but you're preserving it for appeal. If you don't make certain objections at the time, it can be considered waived. So if Diddy's convicted and he has appellate attorneys and his attorneys weren't objecting to certain evidence, questions, etc. in the trial, they can't bring them up on appeal. You've lost the ability to appeal on that basis. So his defense attorneys are trying to create appellate issues as we go along.
Okay, so because I was wondering, I was like, why it feels like they're trying to trigger a mistrial? Because this is the 3rd time. We had it with the Cassie testimony. We had it with the Kid Cudi. He's about to say something. He didn't say it. The judge is like, he didn't say it, though. What are you objecting to?
Right.
This is going to a mistrial. And then today, can you talk about today in regards to them trying to bring up a mistrial again?
Yes. Now, if I understand correctly, and let's break down the facts a little bit, it was with the testimony of the arson investigator from LA County, and it was related to whether or not the fingerprint evidence had been destroyed.
Yes.
Couple questions on that. Number one, and they're not going to get into this in front of the jury, but why was it destroyed? Remember, no criminal case was ever filed. Think about how many hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of cases exist in Los Angeles at any given point. A crime lab is not going to hang on to evidence in perpetuity for a case that's not resulting in criminal charges. The fingerprints could have been destroyed last year, and that's because they did a purge, because there's never going to be any charges brought by Kid Cudi's case. So it's sort of disingenuous to just leave hanging the fingerprint evidence was destroyed, and we don't know the context behind that. Number two, the defense can bring in this evidence in their case. And the reason I think the prosecution was objecting to these questions last week is because the results from a fingerprint analysis from Kid Cudi or from even this arson investigator, they lack personal knowledge or foundation. They are not the appropriate witnesses to testify about the analysis of fingerprints. You need the criminalist who lifted the prints, and then you need the criminalist who did the comparison to say whose prints they belonged to. It's not going to be that arson investigator, and it's certainly not going to be a civilian witness like Kid Cudi. So if the defense wants the evidence of the fingerprints belonged to a woman, not Diddy, and again, like you've been saying all along, he's not doing his own dirt. Do you think he got an Old English 40 bottle, Googled Molotov cocktail, and was in his kitchen with his assistant like no, that didn't happen. But anyway, the defense can bring those witnesses when they put their case on and put in their own evidence that either the fingerprint card was destroyed and try to get in some evidence about why that happened, or that the fingerprints didn't match back to Diddy. I also, and maybe you can help clarify what fingerprints we're talking about, because I've heard some reporting about fingerprints from the car, and I've heard some reporting about fingerprints from Kid Cudi's house that apparently he provided himself.
Yeah.
Those are never coming in any trial. We are not asking a victim or a witness of a crime to be lifting or providing evidence themselves, lifting print. What did he do? Take tape? And does he have a dusting kit? He ordered off, like, where are these prints coming from? Like, that's never coming in. It's just not. Even if someone gave me those prints and I had a criminalist do a comparison, like, the fact that they came from a civilian who needs to follow protocol in lifting prints, I'm probably not surviving an evidentiary hearing and getting in Kid Cudi's investigation about the prints. But what I thought was interesting is that they asked for the mistrial in front of the jury and then made the argument about the assumptions that the jury might make, meaning the implication was that Diddy destroyed the prints.
Yeah.
Attorneys' words aren't evidence. Everything that you argue has to be based on what a witness said. So I guess that's a logical inference, but I don't know if it's one that makes the most sense. And without the full context of that line of questioning from the prosecution, I couldn't opine as to whether or not they were trying to plant a seed in a roundabout way in the jury's mind, or if this was just another defense attempt to raise an appellate issue, sometimes break the momentum of a testifying witness. If someone is testifying really well and like people are really engaged and you start seeing that like tennis match of the jury looking at the witness, you'll get a defense attorney that just objects because it breaks the momentum of that testimony. There's a lot of gamesmanship in trials, and both the prosecution and the defense, like, these lawyers know exactly what the hell they're doing. They came to play. This is exactly what they signed up for. And there's gamesmanship happening on both sides. It's brilliant. It's brilliant to watch from a legal perspective, but they're heavy hitters.
Yeah. If only cameras were in there. Part of me is happy that there aren't cameras, because it's already a circus around this case outside the court. So I can't even imagine what it would have been like if we had cameras in there, because everyone would have been like, did you see Diddy's face when he said this?
The lip readers, the body language experts, which are talking right now based off the sketches.
Yeah. Yeah. And what people are reporting back, he reacted this way and he looked at this thing. So I'm kind of glad that there isn't, but at the same time, it would have been a lot more interesting in analyzing all of that. But okay, before we move on, just a reminder to those that are watching or listening, don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to share this video. Don't forget, you can also hear us on the Kempire podcast. All of that information will be available in the description. I'm here with, you're the Deputy District Attorney of LA County.
Deputy District Attorney in LA County, yes.
Kirsten Brown is here with us. Kirsten, you're going to have to come back because this is only week 3. And you see how many questions I have?
I mean, and like we've still barely scratched the surface. I think we've talked about 2.5 witnesses at this point, and there's just so much.
Yeah, like the Kid Cudi of it all.
Right.
Let's and again, guys, we'll have Kirsten back. She'll come back.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just because there are so many things to talk about. Capricorn Clark testified this week. Last week, it was Kid Cudi. What was your reaction to Kid Cudi's testimony?
I love a witness like a Kid Cudi and a Capricorn Clark because of their realness. And their testimony corroborated each other. It corroborated Cassie, yet it's not exactly the same. It's how things happened through their perspective. And that's how humans are. You and I have both been sitting here recording together, but we could talk away and have 2 completely different descriptions of exactly what happened. And there's jury instructions for that, right? Like 2 people can see and experience an event completely different. And the question is, are the inconsistencies about whether or not the event actually happened, or is it a matter of perspective? Like Kid Cudi talking about Diddy looking like a Marvel superhero or supervillain rather, standing at the window with his arms behind his back, just like a very real, off the cuff kind of comments like that. I think that's what juries find to be really credible, because that's obviously not, that is truly based off how you perceived and how you lived a particular event. And you get the juxtaposition for their emotional demeanors, right? It sounds like Capricorn was a mess during most of her testimony and crying so hard at some points you couldn't even understand what she's saying. And then you have Kid Cudi, who's very much in the mix of all this, but a completely different demeanor and perception of what was going on. So I love that juxtaposition and the personalities of the witnesses coming through. I think jurors enjoy that realness and authenticity as well. I thought they've both been really good witnesses. Again, with Capricorn, I'm very curious about how it landed in the courtroom. Too much crying and too many antics can backfire if it's not authentic.
Yeah.
But if that was an authentic and genuine show of emotion that she still has this many years later, and again, this isn't somebody who hates Diddy. In fact, nobody who testifies hates him.
Yeah.
These aren't people out here with a vendetta or a chip on their shoulder, and if not overtly, there's still some level of respect for him even now.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting too, speaks to how charismatic this man was and how somebody like a Cassie and a Capricorn keep coming back, even in the face of abuse. It's like this man was the light and you're the bug that can't stay away, even if hitting it could kill you.
Yeah.
It's just very, very compelling.
Yeah. Wow. Do you think, because Kid Cudi testifying last week and the arson charge, because that's the big thing. A lot of people have said in their layman understanding, but even some attorneys have said they have not proved their case. They have not shown justification for sex trafficking or for a RICO charge. Can we talk more about that? Because I think that is the big thing that people are not understanding. And that was my intention in bringing you here, so that our audience that are not attorneys have a better understanding as to where, because some attorneys have said, no, the prosecution has started. You're starting to see little things that they've said and done, and certain witnesses and what they've said and testified are building that story for the RICO charges and the sex trafficking.
Correct.
What are your thoughts?
Now, as a prosecutor, you are starting at somewhat of a disadvantage when you have a charge that has a very specific meaning amongst the average person. So you hear RICO and you're thinking The Godfather. You're thinking somebody's running a laundromat, but actually laundering money. You're thinking about those kinds of charges, even though it's a really comprehensive statute that covers a lot of conduct. And then when it comes to sex trafficking, you're thinking about the movie Taken, right? Someone violently pulled away, held against their will, drugged up, held at gunpoint, incredibly violent, that type of thing. So the prosecution has to come in and at some point shift the understanding of the legal definitions of what they're talking about in this case. And because I'm a legal nerd, I got the indictment right here, which I have read a couple of times, and it is really a roadmap for what the prosecution intends to show, intends to prove, like pages 1 through 9. Again, we're all clutching our pearls about what we're hearing. It's all in here. They told us this is the evidence that they're going to put on, which is why I said before I expect to hear from security guards because they're named specifically. And they also talk about a 2023 incident where it sounds like there was some witness tampering, or Diddy was talking to some witnesses on the phone and it was recorded. So I'm assuming that at some point we're going to maybe even get those recordings, if not some evidence of what this was, because it's named specifically in the indictment. Now,
I'm sorry, not to interrupt you, because we have been getting little tidbits of evidence that have been shared with the media. They shared these sex workers' pictures. Is that normal? I felt icky with them sharing that, because first of all, it puts them at danger, especially if they're still sex workers. It felt icky to me. Is that something normal?
This is a really long trial where the jurors will have to go back and dissect a lot of information from a lot of people. If you have anybody who's a visual and you give them either digital copies of the exhibits, or the prosecution has printed them out so they get like a binder of exhibits, and you want to cross-reference testimony that you heard, having a picture of who you heard from a testifying witness can be really, really helpful in helping you digest and remember. And we're a visual society. People like visuals. And so there is a keenness to it, especially if they were more inappropriate pictures. But you want the jury to close their eyes and envision everybody involved, envision the places where this happened. You want what happened to sort of play out like a movie in the juror's head. Yeah. So including photographs of everybody involved is probably something that I would do too, just so that there's no questions in anyone's mind over sometimes even what someone looks like, even though it's not relevant, but it's a way to process information.
But should that have been released to the public? I think that was my main concern. Them sharing it with the jury, I'm okay with. It's sharing it to the public. I was like, oh my gosh, are we sharing this? Are they going to share all the other celebrities that weren't necessarily photographed or videotaped?
That is an interesting point. It's one of those kind of salacious things. But for items to not be shared with the public, that's not the norm. Okay. Usually everything is public record, but there's so much sensitive stuff here in some like videos of the freak off, very inappropriate. And so there's legal reasons why the judge decided to not release that. But more often than not, everything that is entered as an exhibit in a trial is ultimately public record, unless it's done so under seal and the public can have access to.
And the judge has already said that he does not want this to turn into a circus or to be a gossipy case. So the judge is doing what he's supposed to do. So and I thought that argument was really good regarding the freak off videos. If this is what was used to threaten or coerce Cassie at the time, because releasing them would humiliate her and potentially destroy her career, we're not going to now do that as part of this trial, which is part of the charges in this case. We can't be dangling this over this woman's head to become public fodder. So I get that. Yeah. So back to what you were saying in regards to the prosecution proving their case and the indictment being a roadmap. Okay, Elephant Brain is working tonight.
Right. It is a roadmap for the evidence to be expected and racketeering. So what will happen at the conclusion of the case, both parties, and actually this will happen before they give closing arguments, and I expect that this will probably take a considerable amount of time, but both sides will make arguments about what jury instructions have to be presented to the jury. And these are very important. In fact, they can be a reason why a case is overturned if the instructions given to the jury were incorrect. Okay. And there is pattern jury instructions that are accepted in every jurisdiction. The SDNY is in the Second Circuit, so there's a specific set of instructions that go to the Second Circuit, and the parties will argue about some of the language in the instructions and what some instructions should include, what should be excluded. The judge will make rulings on that, and then ultimately the judge will read the jury instructions to the jury. What is most important in those instructions are the elements to the charges of what Diddy has been charged with. And think about that like a recipe. Okay. If you have to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you need bread, you need peanut butter, you need jelly, you need a knife to put it all together.
And if you're Diddy, applesauce.
And right? Okay, Diddy. I mean, baby oil for him. Glistening peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If you don't have the jelly in that sandwich, it's a peanut butter sandwich. It's not the same thing as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That element would be missing. Therefore, he would be not guilty of that particular crime. Okay. So the prosecution in laying out what evidence goes to each element, or I should say each ingredient in the recipe, is crucial. Okay. And when you look at the elements required to prove racketeering conspiracy, it's actually not that complicated. Although overall, this is a complicated case. Yeah. You need an entity. We have that in Sean Combs. You need the leader of that entity. You need other people to be involved with the entity. And then you need, as part of engaging in the entity's business, a pattern of racketeering behavior, which means they have to prove 2 predicate acts within a 10-year period. And the predicate acts are just crimes. And the indictment lists out 8 different crimes that they could prove, and they only need to get 2 of them. Whoa. They mention kidnapping, arson, bribery, witness tampering, forced labor, sex trafficking, transfer for prostitution, and drug possession and or distribution.
And they only have 2?
They only have to have 2. Now, if you have more...
I already found 5 that he did.
They have hit almost all of these at this point. Yeah. Not with proof beyond a reasonable doubt yet, But they've hit all of these. And I expect, because there's 2 to 3 more weeks in the prosecution's case, they're probably going to bolster each of these elements or each of these predicate acts with additional testimony and additional evidence. Yeah. So if they can prove just 2 of these, and that Diddy, along with his other employees, were engaged in doing these acts as part of his business, that's racketeering.
Whoa. Okay. This is, again, why I brought you here, Kirsten. All right. Capricorn Clark, in her testimony this week, Suge Knight did an interview. Okay. Let me ask you, this is a sidebar. Why is it that inmates are able to do interviews on News Nation? Why is that allowed?
And he's been all over everywhere. I saw him with Chris Cuomo. Yes. He was on TMZ. And anybody who will listen, he is. I mean, what else does he have to do, though, Kemp?
But why is that allowed? I don't understand.
It is because he does offer some insight into that world and what was going on. What I thought was interesting.
That I want to know why the warden is allowing this. Don't you have time limits?
Yeah. In California, listen, first of all, I love jail calls because they're recorded and I can get them. And I prove a lot of elements in my cases from jail calls. They're absolutely fantastic. And people think they're talking in coded language. No, you're not. They call from another inmate's PIN number and think I can't find it. Yes, I can.
They accused Diddy of that while he was awaiting for the trial.
He probably got another inmate doing his bidding, but your privileges can be taken away if you're caught doing that type of thing. But he's convicted, serving his time, so there isn't going to be limitations on his phone calls. What's interesting is how the coordination is happening because they can't call him; he has to call in. So clearly, he's got people's numbers. He must have a producer's number. Is probably watching the trial on his government-issued iPad. Being in a California prison, yes.
Oh. Okay. And Tory Lanez, why is Tory Lanez able to post on social media? Or is he posting on social media via people out on the outside?
Could be both.
Oh, on his burner phone?
on right? Maybe Capricorn went and got him a burner phone too.
Oh, you know what Capricorn. Oh my, people are, I mean, speaking of Suge Knight, he talked about Capricorn Clark. I'm not going to give any credence to what he had to say about her. I want to talk about what she said on the stand.
Okay.
And again, this was someone that we could consider a victim of Diddy because she claimed that he also kidnapped her, that he also assaulted her, that he also, for 5 days, brought her to an empty office.
What is this?
Sidebar. Look, another sidebar. Diddy has friends or connections with an ex-FBI agent. That came out during the trial.
Like what? And I wonder if he recorded that because he likes to record things. Oh. And can't you see that like in a movie, some dingy, empty office, one chair, one desk, windows blacked out, and she's hooked up to this lie detector. Like that is a wild.
5 days in a row, accusing her of stealing jewelry. I literally said to myself, I don't think she really stole jewelry. I don't think he thought that she stole jewelry.
Right.
I think he wanted to exert his power.
Yeah.
Okay, what was your reaction to Capricorn Clark's testimony, both between the direct and the cross-examination? Where do you feel as if, I'm gonna ask this in a different way. Where do you feel as if the defense actually got her and took away a little bit of her credibility?
They established that, I don't want to say, when I say she had feelings for Diddy, I don't mean romantic feelings, but clearly revered him and likely still does. Although I'm not entirely sure that hurts her credibility because here she is, testifying. I don't know if necessarily willingly, but it's again that sort of that reverence. But I know he did harmful things to me, but a cycle of abuse.
I'm about to say, I'm like, and again, I'm going to bring an expert on to talk about that because there are so many stories in pop culture that we've covered recently when it comes to, I'm just going to say, Black women that are the victims of domestic violence. And I don't know the stats on that in regards to your office when it comes to the amount of Black women that are affected by domestic violence. But we have to bring someone on because I don't think people realize it's not just your intimate partner that's affected by this type of abuse. We're talking about someone that still, if you can, when we talk about domestic, she lived with him. She was at his house for up to 24 hours in a day.
Correct.
So that's very intimate too.
And in terms of stealing the jewelry, like, when was she going to leave with it and where was she going to put it? This woman had no agency to be off on her own. And that's very bold.
Yeah.
A very bold move for seemingly someone who had quite a bit of reverence for Diddy. We won't ever know one way or the other, but like you said, did he really even think that happened at all? Or was this all just sort of a ruse to let her know? Having her in Central Park with the threats, like, it was wild. It was absolutely wild. And while a very different relationship than what Diddy and Cassie had, just another example of a woman sort of under his thumb with very abusive tendencies towards her. Although that seems to be true of the men who work for him as well. George Kaplan had wild stories to tell. The stylist, it seemed like Diddy ran up on him mad because of how he dressed Cassie. We're seeing the pattern, and that's really the point. It's cumulative, and it's a pattern of behavior that he is engaged in. He has people who are working for him engaged in, and that's how we're getting to the racketeering conspiracy.
Yeah. For those that don't have an understanding, if you receive a subpoena from the prosecution, you have to show up, right? Or you'll get arrested.
Correct. You do need to show up. The prosecution can ask for what the equivalent of an arrest warrant would be, and then you could have a material witness order if it's a material witness actually held in custody for their refusal to come to court. So subpoenas aren't invitations. It's a requirement. And people not wanting to come to court, whether you are a victim, a witness, whatever, it's shocking when someone willingly comes to court for me. The norm is people just don't, for a variety of reasons, don't want to be there, don't want to participate.
And why because I don't believe, because I don't know if they're required to share this in court if they've received any sort of immunity. Because we saw with Kaplan, he was like, I need immunity.
Which was interesting because the prosecution is required to turn over when you've proffered someone, meaning you've gotten a statement from them and then you've offered them or given them a grant of immunity. You are required to turn that over to the defense. So the defense is always going to know about that. More often than not, a prosecutor will bring it up on direct exam to take some of the sails out when the defense says, aren't you testifying under a grant of immunity? Weren't you participating in some of these things as well? Or like sort of trying to attack someone's credibility. But what a prosecutor is always going to say in closing is, yes, we had to give that person immunity, the person who was doing the dirt with the defendant, because who else is going to tell us what was going on? Was Diddy going to go grab a barista from Starbucks and an ER nurse and say, come on, we're about to go kill Kid Cudi? It's going to be his people. And in a classic RICO case, you want to get to the top. So you are flipping and turning the people below them, offering them leniency or immunity in order to get them to testify against the person at the top. And then, of course, it becomes fodder for the defense to attack someone's credibility of, hey, you're trying to save your own skin here by testifying against Diddy now. Although since he's at the top of the pyramid, it's going to be like the most culpable. I don't know if it carries as much weight for true co-conspirators of people with equal weight. Like clearly all of these people are doing whatever they're doing at the direction of Diddy. Yeah. Not just on their own.
That's the thing. And I've heard mixed things in regards to, do we believe anyone else will be charged here?
I think if anyone else was going to be charged, they would have already been charged. And I've heard other analysis that like, well, if the prosecution, if an acquittal happens here, they'll just keep charging him with new victims. You can't do that. Okay. When you have evidence of a particular crime, and let's say, just for example, there's 100 other victims and you know about them, you have to bring everybody together at the same time. You can't like go in batches of 10 with an attempt to keep trying somebody for the same charges with the same victims during the same time period of conduct. So, that's not happening. I think they probably reviewed all of the civil cases and pulled out the evidence that could be corroborated through other witnesses. And that's what they're using as the basis for the racketeering.
Okay. Dawn Richard testified last week, and she also has a civil lawsuit against Sean Diddy Combs, and that was brought up during her testimony. She's also in the news again this week because her ex-boyfriend, Q from Day 26, is accusing her of drugging him. She came out with a statement, then deleted that statement. I'm guessing the legality is part of the reason why she probably deleted that statement. I don't know. How did you feel about Dawn Richard's testimony and how the defense really tried to pick at her credibility, because she talked about witnessing multiple times of Cassie being harmed and abused by Sean Diddy Combs.
It seemed like they were trying to pick at her about her unwillingness to intervene or to say something or to stop it. But that is a significant expectation to put on another young artist who made the band and is trying to make their career. Yeah. We've heard from a couple of people who, I won't say they say that they tried to interview, or there was someone today who testified today and said they actually tried to stop him from doing something.
Deontay Nash, the stylist, he jumped on Diddy's back.
He's the only one who we've heard so far willing to step in and say something, because this is the kind of power that man has. So I get why the defense is poking holes of why wouldn't do something. But I think at this point, it's so many people have witnessed the bad conduct. It's cumulative. Yeah. It's hard to take any one person and say, we don't believe you, because they're all saying a version of the same thing. So like everyone might have different reasons about their willingness to testify. And she has a pending lawsuit, which is always going to look a little bit suspect. Yeah. But she, and again, we're only getting this from reporting, but it didn't seem like she was this enthusiastic witness skipping into court, singing like a bird about stuff that happened. It seemed like they really had to draw stuff out of her. And it read like she didn't want to be there or necessarily be talking about these things. But again, that's just speculation.
The defense brought up multiple times that based on the multiple interviews that she did with the prosecution, they pointed out, well, you never mentioned this during your multiple interviews with the prosecution. Why are all of a sudden you're bringing them up now?
Always going to be a question by the defense when you're getting new information. It is often the case that you get more details when someone's testifying than you ever got during an interview.
Okay.
Sometimes it's as simple, and I think she actually said this, why didn't you bring up the gun? No one ever asked me. Really common, because you think if something traumatic happened to you that someone's just going to throw up every detail. But this is an exaggerated example, but having a witness who witnessed someone else get shot, and I'll say to the witness talking and they'll say, and I got hit by a bullet too. And it'll be like, well, why didn't you ever say anything to anybody? And they're like, well, no one ever asked me, so that really is how people think, particularly in a situation that they don't necessarily want to be involved in. Yeah. So when you were interviewed multiple times, it's not always going to be by the same person. It's not always going to be under the same conditions. It's not always going to be the same amount of time. It's not always going to be as detailed. The most information you are ever going to get from a witness is when they actually testify, and you were getting into everything, whereas your pre-interview is probably just a summary, and you're really just trying to get at what does this person remember.
Yeah. Wow. First of all, I appreciate you taking so much time. As I said before, I hope that you will come back. I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet.
I'm not ready to go.
No, good. But I'm not going to hold you too long, because I know the attention span of our audience. They're like, okay. Fair. But I do have some questions I do want to ask. But before we get to those questions, in regards to the defense, when they have to start presenting their case and their witnesses, who do you think that they might call? And it doesn't have to be a specific name of someone. Like what kind of figure, what archetype of a person will the defense probably call to the stand? And will Sean Diddy Combs take the stand?
It is usually not a good idea for a defendant to take the stand. It's ultimately every defendant's choice. Even if it's what your attorneys they're telling you not to do it. It's your choice. Yeah. And outside of the presence of the jury, when the defense is putting their case on, the judge will question Diddy directly. If he understands he has a right to testify, does he choose to exercise that right? If no, he'll take a waiver. If yes, then, they'll put him up on the stand. There is so much to cross-examine him about. And unless he's willing to fall on his sword, which maybe he does, and he gets up and seems remorseful and contrite and apologetic and is willing to concede all of the DV and maybe some of the lesser conduct and say, but this wasn't a part of my business. This was my personal life. This is what I like to do with my girlfriends on the side. It's not how I ran my company. Maybe that type of thing I could see maybe.
Yeah.
I would imagine that if he is going to testify, they've done mock directs and cross-examinations with his lawyers to get it with an aggressive cross-examination so he can understand what that would be like. I'd be surprised if he testified, but people with a little bit of my undiagnosis of him being a narcissist, you think you can explain everything away. Human traffickers, it's usually my human trafficking defendants that like to testify. Every human trafficking trial I've done, the defendant has testified because they think they're smarter than everybody and that they can explain all of it away.
Oh, and you do know that Mark Agnafilo, Diddy, one of Diddy's many attorneys, the one that's most outspoken, he did say when asked, I think it was by TMZ, whether or not Diddy would take the stand. And he says, I don't know if I can keep him off the stand. So
if he could pull it together, he could do himself a lot of favor, but it can go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
Horribly wrong. So maybe he'll testify. I think it's unlikely.
Yeah.
We'll see. But they might put on character type witnesses. So other people who worked for his businesses and organizations to talk about what type of boss he was and what the environment was like at work and maybe make it seem less toxic than what the prosecution witnesses are showing. If they really want to get into the nitty gritty about the Kid Cudi and the arson, they might call some witnesses who are part of the investigation in Los Angeles to demonstrate that it was inconclusive. They could never definitively pin it on Diddy. They might have an expert about the cycles of abuse. I think there's also been some intimation about a mental health defense that he might put on because of his substance abuse issues, which would go to negate his intent. However, there is so much conduct over such a long period of time. I think that becomes difficult. And in some cases, voluntary intoxication is not a defense. You can't intentionally get yourself drunk or high and then go and do some wild stuff and be like, well, I was out of my mind. I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. But I expect an expert or two to contextualize some of the conduct and then probably some character witnesses to say that he really is, to paint a different picture of the type of person he is.
Do you think Janice Combs, his mother, might take the stand?
She seems like a bit of a wild card.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
So I would imagine his defense team and then someone's mother, because we all expect our mothers to be on the stand with the highest praise.
Yeah.
I think the jury was going to be a little, look at Miss Combs. She's cute and always dressed in the whole nine. But I don't know if what she has to say about her son is going to be taken seriously.
Okay. All right. All right. I'm not going to hold you much longer. I did see that we had quite a few questions from our members. So shout out to our channel members here on YouTube. We appreciate you guys weighing in. So I'm not going to be able to get to all of the questions. Maybe, because I don't even have that many. Maybe some of these have been answered already. Foxy is asking a question. This question for the lawyer, Kirsten Brown. Do you think there are any chance for Diddy that he will walk out a free man from this trial?
That is always a possibility. We do not control what a jury does. It is entirely up to them. But remember, the prosecution and the defense they don't have the same burden. The people have to prove the case, but both sides have to get 12 people. To convict him, it has to be unanimous guilty. To acquit him, it has to be a unanimous not guilty. And so getting 12 people to have heard all of this evidence and say, nothing to see here, it's always possible. It's always possible.
And I think it's still too early.
It is early.
Third week.
It is early. But even on cases that seem like slam dunks, we got it, we hit every element. If it's a jury who's just decided that they don't want to convict, they won't. And they don't have to explain themselves to anybody.
Wow.
Ever. So if that happened, we could potentially never know the reasons why. But it is early and it is a tall order for the prosecution and the defense to get the unanimous verdict.
Okay. All right. Let's see what else people, because I think some of these things we've answered. Let me see. Okay. Okay. Amaris asks, why do you think so many people are having a hard time understanding the RICO aspect of this particular trial?
I think because of the way RICO is typically used to prosecute people. And we all know that Rudy Giuliani was one of the first prosecutors to use it in the way that he did. And it was primarily for mob cases, that type of thing. When we think criminal enterprise, we think mobsters, maybe a gang like Mexican mafia, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The charge is so incongruent with domestic violence, with sex trafficking, with the evidence that we're hearing. Yet when you look at what's within the statute of all of the different types of predicate acts, like I mentioned, I named the 8 or 9 earlier, they're all in there. And there's testimony about all of those things. So it's not a stretch to use RICO. It's just not what we see commonly in high profile trials.
Taylor asked the question, can this case, knowing the circumstances, see more people charged for the involvement? But we've sort of answered that already in regards to it. If they were going to charge anyone, they would have.
And they have the top person. So unless there's someone even above Diddy, I don't even know who that person would be. I doubt it. You don't start at the top and then prosecute the smaller people along the way.
Yeah.
Typically.
But a person like Christina Curran, his chief of staff, we don't know whether or not she will be testifying, but she's been named in civil lawsuits. She's been named in this as aiding and abetting sometimes in regards to being an assistant. I'd be shocked if she doesn't testify, especially because of how long she's worked for Diddy, how close she's worked for Diddy. I can't imagine she'll be testifying on the side of the defense. I'm sure the prosecution has hemmed her up. What do you think?
I would hope they have, because of the type of testimony she could provide. If she was a defense witness, that means she wouldn't have immunity and she'd be opening herself up to quite a bit. And you can't, again, like I said, you can't have a direct and not a cross. So she can't testify for Diddy and then not want to answer any questions on cross-examination, or her testimony will be stricken. So if she's going to enter that courtroom, it's probably going to be under a grant of immunity.
Wow. All right. You have to come back, Kirsten. You have to.
Anytime.
You are part of our Legal Eagle squad, okay?
Listen, everyone is sick of me wanting to do the deep dive with this trial. So to get on here and get into it with you, anytime. Save your question.
Anything that we haven't addressed that you like this, let's say this is your closing argument. And this was the final week. Is there something here that you would want the jurors to know? Oh, that's a good question.
Oh, and you put me on the spot.
I just thought of it. I was like, ooh. I'll ask you that question again when you come back.
Going back to my indictment, what I'm doing is taking the picture of each witness and bullet pointing their testimony, and I am literally slotting it in for each element of what that testimony proved. Because the prosecution, you hear about having to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. That is each element of each offense. And if even one ingredient in that recipe is gone, the whole thing goes away. So closing arguments are going to be long because there's a lot to unpack. And I don't expect the average person to be looking at the indictment or reading the jury instructions. It's what I do for a living. I love it. But when you start to break it down like that, they're checking the boxes. I won't say they could rest today and be okay, but they are checking the boxes in what seems like a very methodical order.
If you had to be critical of how they've handled the first 3 weeks, the prosecution, what would be one of your critiques?
Again, this is without knowing everything. And I think I mentioned this earlier. I would have tightened up Cassie's testimony, that timeline. For example, when it comes to pervasive domestic abuse, you really want the first incident, you want the last incident, and you want to build in between. And because you have that 2016 tape, that would be my marker. So I want to talk about the first time he got abusive, and then or even using 2016, let's work back. Was that the first time he ever hit you? Based on that, absolutely not. Was that the 10th time, the 20th time? And let's talk about the first. Was that the last time he hit you? So you want specific marker points. And here it matters so much because there was a period of time where what was happening was consensual. So you really need jury to understand when it flipped and it was no longer consensual, but she was so deep into the cycle of abuse that saying no just wasn't an option.
I have a couple more questions. I'm sorry. because I just remember, because there have been so many people that have taken the stand in these first 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the people that we haven't talked about was Gina, Cassie's former best friend.
Oh, that's right.
How did you feel about what she testified? Because they're no longer best friends, but she documented it in the span of their 17-year friendship. She only was able to but you actually answered some of what I have to think about when it comes to that. You don't necessarily see all the abuse that your friend or family members are going through.
Right.
What did you think of Gina's testimony and the effectiveness it may have had on this case?
Responding to what you were just saying, and then I'll answer that question specifically. I think this is the rare case that there are so many witnesses to the conduct. I mean, there usually isn't multiple people who have seen domestic violence happening. So that just, again, speaks to the power that Diddy had over his entire world and everybody who was in it, and the willingness of everyone to turn a blind eye at best and at worst participate in some of the abuse. Her testimony was really interesting, especially because I thought what was most compelling about her is she was like, I was out. I got my little check, whatever they had going on, I wanted no parts of. And I said, girl, best of luck, bye. So I found her to be credible. And again, another small piece of corroboration, but very interesting of somebody who saw this for what it is and was like, I don't need anything from you, so I can extricate myself from this situation, which is very different than the other people we're hearing from, who were either employed by Diddy or, like Cassie, signed to his label with a 10-album deal, waiting on those other 9 albums. And she didn't need anything from him. And so that's someone who was like, I'm out of here. And that's what makes her so different than some of the other people who have testified.
Yeah. So it probably did land for the jury, possibly.
Again, because she was able to corroborate some of what Cassie was saying. And at this point, it's so cumulative. It's really hard to be like, it's just not true. It's multiple perspectives of the same conduct. And
what does because I don't know if he gave her this $30,000 from a personal account or business account. I can't recall. I don't even know if that was even revealed. Would that also be a part of the racketeering element?
Oh, you know what? That's interesting, Kim. Okay, Kim Esquire. I hadn't thought about that.
The other part of that is too, today when the investigator Jimenez was testifying, I believe, from the summary today, because everything's falling together, they mentioned that one of the cars that were seen at the scene of the crime at his home, the black Escalade, was a Bad Boy Productions Escalade.
Now, what I didn't understand is at what point he saw that Escalade. Was it while he was there conducting the investigation, like Diddy had someone with eyes on the house? Or what timeline?
This is fact, but this is what I assume based on reading some of the summaries and things like that. What I assume, because remember they were saying that Diddy saw the police coming. So I'm wondering if that was the time. Did they cross paths at that particular point? So that's what I gathered. But again, got
it. But they were there long enough for this investigator to clock it and memorize the plate number. That was probably a blacked out Escalade parked across the street. And it sounds like Kid Cudi might live in the hills in LA. Yeah, if Capricorn talking about the mountain lions, that probably sounds crazy to people who don't live here. But yes, coyotes, mountain lions, all of it. If he's up in the Hollywood Hills.
Ooh. Oh my gosh, that was a sidebar. What did I ask you before that?
Oh, I know. What did you ask? Oh, we were talking about Gina.
Yeah, Gina. Okay. All right. Oh my goodness. Again, you're just going to have to come back. This is only the 3rd week. and they're on track. The judge is keeping them on track. The prosecution feels like they're ahead of themselves. They're thinking that this will be wrapped up in 5 to 6 weeks.
Which is crazy because what is today? May 28th? And they're still talking about the prosecution 3 more weeks of evidence. Full day trials, and they're moving at a clip now of putting multiple people on a day. I mean, buckle up, Buttercup. There's more to come.
Yeah, it's going to be definitely interesting. And I hope that you will come back to unpack some of this.
Anytime.
You've given me a lot of new insight, and I'm sure the audience as well. Guys, again, show the love by the applause in the live chat and liking the video and sharing and all that stuff. I don't know if you're on social media like that, or if you even want people to follow you, but
I keep a low to no profile on social media because I am actively in Los Angeles prosecuting cases and don't need to be found by everybody.
Yeah, I wish I couldn't be found, but it's okay. I'm glad you found me though, so that we could have these conversations. And again, you're definitely going to have to come back and probably talk about some of this other stuff in regards to DV and Black women and how they're directly affected by this, or not protected in this world. It's not just in the entertainment world, but definitely just
generally. And I'm not trying to sit up here like I'm anybody's hero or out here saving lives, but I do hope that for the Black women and the women of color who are victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse, who can often feel victimized by the system as well, when we get to work together and I'm handling their cases, to hopefully see a face that looks like theirs and an advocate that believes you and is going to advocate for you and fight for justice for you, hopefully helps bring some healing, some closure, and an opportunity for that survivor to go on to thrive.
What would you say? And what would you say like a person like Cassie that is involved with such a powerful man, or maybe not a powerful man, and they're concerned about reporting this crime? Like, what would you say to someone to encourage them? Like, no, we can help you.
It is sexual violence and domestic violence are the most underreported crimes that there are for so many reasons. A lot that we've seen come out in this trial between victim shaming, in light of evidence, people just not believing you. We have seen Cassie get beat, and there's still people out here like, oh. So there's a lot of reasons people don't come forward. And people stay in domestic violence relationships where the abuser doesn't have two nickels to rub together. So there's clearly more going on than a financial component or being taken care of. That we are seeing the anomaly where we're talking about someone who is mega influential, mega wealthy, although domestic violence persists across every socioeconomic class. Anyway, if you are not ready to file charges, you can still document it. You can still go to the emergency room and have a report taken at the emergency room, and it just becomes part of your medical records. You can have forensic photographs taken. So, for example, if you're strangled, which is very common during domestic violence, you're not going to see an injury around the neck, but they have certain types of cameras where you see underneath the skin. And oftentimes you can see the imprint of someone's hands or a ligature mark underneath the neck that wouldn't necessarily be visible to the naked eye. Document symptoms, raspy voice. Did you black out? Did you urinate on yourself? All classic signs of strangulation where someone might look uninjured. My point is, document what happened. Tell someone about the abuse because that person could potentially be a witness later. If you're not comfortable filing a police report, take pictures yourself. Try to document the dates and the locations of what happened. And then when you reach a point where you are ready to get out of the relationship or ready for the criminal justice system to hold your abuser accountable, that's when you can call the police. That's when you can contact the DA's office and get the process of criminal proceedings going. But there's resources out there to help get you out of the relationship, even if you never want to pursue criminal charges. The important thing is to make sure that women and men feel safe and have options and have support. And the criminal justice is just a component of moving on and moving away from an abusive relationship.
You just triggered a question for you.
Sure.
Because Regina Ventura, Cassie Ventura's mother, testified.
Very powerful testimony.
And she took photos of the abuse that her daughter experienced at the hands of Sean Diddy Combs. I noticed, though, the defense decided not to do a cross-examination. What were your thoughts on that, and how will that affect their case, if at all?
It was a strategic decision for sure. I'm sure not because they had no questions. I can't recall seeing pictures of Cassie's mom, but I would imagine she's an older woman. And what might it look like if you're getting up challenging this woman who was like, I took out a second mortgage on my house? What are you going to get up and be like, you're a liar? Where show us the wire receipt. Sometimes It's not uncommon for a witness to testify even better on cross-examination when they feel like they're being attacked or they feel like someone's calling them a liar. And if they felt like she wasn't testifying to any particular element that they needed to negate, why lose points of credibility with the jury? Just let this woman get off the stand. It was so many witnesses potentially fade into what at the end of the trial will probably be a couple dozen witnesses.
Yeah. Because basically Regina Ventura accused him of trying to extort because he was going to release a sex tape of Cassie. Is extortion under RICO too?
I looked back at the indictment. It's not listed here, but it's United States Code. Oh, hold on.
Not me getting you stumped. Yes.
I know, no, but because I was trying to think of the specific code section, but there's so many. Yeah. And I would imagine that extortion is we're talking paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of predicate offenses that can fall under racketeering. I can't imagine that extortion isn't one of them. And what's interesting too is the predicates can be based on a state count or on a federal count. So that broadens the scope even more of the type of conduct that you could loop in under RICO. It really is this massive umbrella that encompasses a lot of criminal behavior where convicted on its own might not amount to that much time, you know?
And I highlight that because there's so many people saying they're not proving the charges. And I was like, well, I feel like there's so many of these little nuggets to this situation. And I was thinking, wait, extortion could possibly fall under that as well.
You're
Something
right.
for us to examine, because I'm probably sure that's not the first or last time that extortion will come up in this case.
Yeah, and that was just that was powerful testimony. $20,000 for him could be a dinner with a few people out, and what it meant for Cassie's mother and her family, and having to go take out a second mortgage to get that money, and then to play in her face by sending it right back. You know, whereas the defense could be like, look, like he never really wanted her money, but it was the act of making her jump through those hoops. That's what he wanted. And it's very sad.
Very similar to what I was saying about the Capricorn Clark and the lie detectors. I was like, I don't think he really believes she took anything. I think he was playing mind games.
Yeah, it's a method of control. And whether I have you sitting in an empty warehouse getting interrogated, or I have you at the bank trying to get money that I don't need, it's about control.
Wow. Again, Kirsten Brown, thank you so much for being here. You will definitely have to be back. And I know everyone's going to have their own questions and comments. So feel free, y'all. We will definitely be bringing Kirsten back. Kirsten, thank you so much for being here.
Kim, thank you. Despite the subject matter, this was a good time. And I learned work with your coverage.
Thank you. I've learned so much. I knew I was going to learn a lot, but there were things that I just did not. I was like, oh. So I can only imagine what else is going to happen from this case. Thank you so much for the work that you do and for spending time with us and teaching our community so that we know a little bit more when we're viewing this case and we're not just taking in, because there is also a lot of misinformation that's going around as well on social media about this case. And we're going to continue to follow it, guys. As always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, turn on your notifications. And if you're listening to the podcast version of this, don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. Thank you, Kirsten Brown, for being here. And thank you all for watching and listening. Bye, y'all.
Thanks, Kemp.
Thanks for tuning in to Kempire here on the Kempire Radio Network. Don't forget to give the Kempire 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. And as always, for more information on everything Kempire Radio Network, head on over to KempireRadio.com.